Hey, I'm Suzanne Gallagher, and I am the Executive Director of Parents' Rights in Education. And today we have Conrad Woodall. He is a retired police officer for 11 years, and now he is the Idaho Director of Parents' Rights in Education. Conrad has a master's degree in forensic psychology, and his grad school thesis focused on therapeutic benefits of self-defense on survivors of sexual assault, sex trafficking, and intimate partner violence through targeted exposure therapy. Conrad has extensive knowledge and experience working with sexual abuse victims. He taught at the community college level for 10 years in both psychology and criminal justice programs. PRIE has found that comprehensive sexuality education under the umbrella of diversity, equity, inclusion programs, the ones used in K-12 public schools across the nation, in practice, sanction grooming of minors by school staff and peers. So Conrad, I want to know, do you agree if comprehensive sexuality education curriculum is the most, for the most part, is age appropriate, like everybody says?
Well, that's the new debate, right? And I think the minute you stepped below 5th grade, so when you're going down as low as pre-K now, but and this heated up when DeSantis did his bill there where he banned it in K through.
Yep.
I would say K through 4th actually academically is what's sound, that it's absolutely age inappropriate. Children at that age are not ready cognitively to be having those discussions, and it violates long-standing theories in developmental psychology.
Sure.
Piaget and Erickson and their stages of development. We've researched this. We know that the brain is ready at certain stages for certain things, and they are not ready for sexuality and gender at that age group.
Okay, so I mean, their parents know this instinctively, don't they? But there's actual research and science to back that up, that the kids really aren't ready at these very young ages. So for information and those that are watching, what is the legal definition of grooming?
Well, grooming is well, we'd have to kind of, I'm going to break that into 2 different groups.
Okay.
But just as far as related to sexuality and teaching sexuality, grooming is a method to build trust. That's basically what it is. And usually the groomer is going to try to build trust with the child and the adult parents, guardians of the child, with the primary purpose of gaining access, especially alone time with the child, so that they can start the offending process. So in a nutshell, it's a method of gaining trust so that they can gain access to the child. What we see often referred to in grooming connected to all this is the idea of political, ideological grooming. And while we can debate that, and it may or may not be true, it tends to just divide everybody on either side of the camp. One of the things that I'm trying to focus on, especially with this whole sex education under the umbrella of diversity and education or equity being brought down to K through 4th grade, that not only is it academically unsound, but it brings with it a whole host of dangers in terms of child safety. So I want to somewhat focus on the fact that grooming the way that we're talking right now, I don't care what side of the political spectrum you are. I have never met a parent, left or right, who says, yes, they want their children more vulnerable to pedophiles. Never have heard that.
No, it really, our issue is a bipartisan, I would say nonpartisan issue.
Right.
It's about the relationship between children and their parents, but also children and other adults who may gain access to them. And we need to be thinking about it in that sense. I appreciate this. So based on behavior, How do you determine if grooming is taking place?
So I'm gonna quote from RAIN, which is the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, which is the
Okay.
largest organization for sex abuse survivors in the country.
Oh,
So two of the main categories that they cite, just so you know that it's not just my opinion here,
sure.
is age inappropriate, excessive talk or interest in sexuality,
Oh,
and sexual behavior that is age inappropriate. So you can already start to see the dilemma here is that if, as a parent, my main method of identifying the fact behaviorally that my child is being groomed by a molester is that they have knowledge and interest in sexuality and sexual behaviors that's age inappropriate. Why is it age inappropriate? Because we know that the brain isn't interested in those topics at that age group and never has been. Okay.
oh,
So because it's pre-puberty,
yeah.
right?
And they don't care about it, really.
Right. So that's my two of my greatest, ways of knowing that something is wrong. When you educate an entire generation, you are literally stripping parents away from the precursor to even know that their child is being groomed, because now it's not age inappropriate. All the kids are going to come home with extra knowledge and interest and talk
Right.
and expressions of sexuality because they're just calling it education.
Correct. And they are programmed to not have any modesty whatsoever.
Yeah.
Because the classrooms are mixed.
Right. So you're
Everybody, and this whole menstrual push, it's all about that. Tearing down all modesty, period.
Yeah. So they're pre-grooming. Yeah. They're literally pre-grooming for molesters. So that any person that comes into contact with your child who has nefarious intent in terms of molestation, literally the majority of the work has been done for them under the auspices of education, right? We're going to call it education. Right. So in the name of tolerance and equity and diversity, you're going to create victimization on a wholesale level.
Oh, this is really enlightening. So Conrad, I've got a card in my hand. It's a card that's handed out at a middle school, and it's usually handed out primarily during a week in June. Well, no, excuse me, it's not June, I believe it's March, on the Day of Silence, okay, when the LGBTQ community celebrates solidarity, etc. Okay, and so this is handed out by school staff, which would include teachers, counselors, etc., to Oregon middle school students. And it says this: I am a safe person. If you are LGBTQ+, Black, brown, Asian, any race, coming out, anything, I am always a safe person and will hold space for you. Is that grooming?
Well, everything in context, right? So yes, I mean, I would say that's absolutely grooming, but you have context there. So let me change the context for a little bit. Let's say we were talking about a teacher who is a mandatory reporter who's potentially looking at helping a child abuse situation, right? Sure. So in that case, we would want to build a trusting relationship. However, if you switch that over to putting that under the umbrella of sex and gender, you're opening up a whole can of worms connected to molestation, which we know, anybody can look this up. There is a growing problem of sexual misconduct by school employees in our education. Some moral and ethical issues that have to be addressed with the fact that the system itself has its own issues that it hasn't rectified with molesters. And you're going to allow those people to teach sex ed and build this trusting process, meaning you're essentially allowing them to groom without any repercussions.
right. And have intimate relationships. I mean, I don't mean intimate necessarily sexually so much, but trusting relationships, private relationships, one-on-one with the adult and the student.
Correct. And the last step for molestation, after desensitizing the child to sexual topics and conversations, the
Right.
last step is the desensitization to touch. And some of that already takes place in the school environment in general. I mean, if your teacher's giving you a high five, if they're patting you on the back, you know, we're not saying that sometimes that stuff doesn't happen and that every teacher's a molester. Like, that's not what we're saying.
No.
We're just saying that the environment itself is literally, by definition, a perfect breeding ground for the grooming process, and you're going to go ahead and complete the process and call it sex
Right.
education, right?
Right.
So if you don't have teachers, if you have teachers that are patting a kid on the back or giving them a high five, but they're not teaching sex ed, then it's going to be hard to complete that grooming process, right? But if you give them this whole sex ed curriculum, plus the school environment, plus the trust, plus the initial contact that's natural among a teacher and a student, a high five or a pat on the head, the last transition after you've built all that is the sexual molestation. The process is almost complete. And this is forensic psychology here. This is all we're talking about. What is the method that molesters use? It's well studied, it's well researched, and it looks exactly like what they are calling sex education and gender studies.
Okay, so it's safe to say, and I'm going to wind this up, we could talk forever, but this is fascinating, and parents need to know this. They need to understand it. So is it fair to say public school students, K through 12, are being groomed?
Absolutely. And
Absolutely.
the lower they bring this education down, the more damaging it's going to be, when we already live in a country where 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be molested by the age of 18. That's a 2006 CDC report.
Wow. Thank you, Conrad.
Absolutely.